Welcome to this week's episode of PreZenze. I'm your host, Cindy, and today we are joined by Henry Adelman. Hi, Henry.
Hi, Cindy. Good to see you again.
Oh, it's great to see you. For those of you who don't know, Henry has been on the podcast before, and he was so much fun to have on and has such a wonderful spirit and is an inspirational person and leader that I asked him back. So, Henry, thank you for coming back.
No, it means a lot. I had a lot of fun last time I was here. I just enjoyed our in-depth and thoughtful and meaningful conversation. I think that's what a lot of the joy of life is, when we get to just sit down with interesting, intelligent people and just be able to go over and talk about our insights onto certain matters of life. And, I'm hoping that, we can have some more meaningful dialogue today on whatever kind of comes to mind.
Awesome. I'm very excited. And I like something that you said. It just made my spidey senses go bling, 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 which was this idea of joy and
Yes.
bringing joy to all aspects of our lives, including deep and meaningful conversations, right? So sometimes we think that if you're being deep, it has to be very serious and intense. And that's not true. You can
Right.
have deep and meaningful conversations filled with joy.
Yes, absolutely.
And,
No, and
and go ahead.
No, I just think a lot of the time it is the topic of discussion. I think there is deeper meaning to most anything that's being discussed. I think when it comes to certain social issues, political issues, I think especially nowadays, that's where we get a little masked and we tend to kind of maybe not say those things with as much gumption or as much definitive rhetoric, just because we're worried about what the other person might think, especially if you don't know them as well. But I think a lot of the time, if you're just talking about different things in life, when it comes to family and friends and your adventures, that's where the fun is to be had. And that's where the joy is from having those deep conversations. And last time you and I spoke, we were on the precipice of doing something that was probably one of the harder things I've done in my adult life and in my career with our TEDx talk. I think bonds are formed through adverse situations, right? And you and I had a strong bond just due to the situation that we were kind of undergoing at the moment throughout those weeks. I think with that, I think there's a lot of teamwork and a lot of camaraderie that happens when you're both pitted in those types of situations. And I think it does allow for some deeper thought to happen when you're both kind of working through those things together,
Yes, yes. And you know what? I'm going to piggyback off of that, because there was a couple of things that you said. One was that we did create a bond. And I think it's for several reasons. One is, yes, we were both working towards a communal goal. We were part of a group which gave a TEDx talk. So we all wanted the talk, the event, to be a success for ourselves, but more importantly, for the collective. And I think that that's what made the experience special, because there wasn't necessarily a sense of competition of I'm better than you. Certainly that does happen. And I'm not saying competition is bad. Sometimes competition is what pushes us to grow, to expand, and to create new things. But when we're talking about promoting ideas that create a better world, that are about thoughtfulness, that are about leadership, it's not about competition. It's about how we elevate one another. And I do think that there was that sense that, both you and I felt, as well as some of the other speakers. For example, your now wife, Victoria, who we'll talk about a little bit later. So there was this sense of wanting everybody to do well and to succeed, and have an event that was purposeful, not just for us, but the speakers and the audience. And I think we succeeded in that as best as we could. Yes. And I think that because there was this openness, this genuineness of our group, that allowed the bond.
Yes. I will shout out to Prince Williams and Amanda Holder for bringing together what I thought was a prepared group of extroverts and leaders in their own fields. Like you mentioned, I think when you're in those situations, and this is right up my alley as a coach, when you talk about everyone kind of pulling their own weight towards a communal goal, like you said, it just strikes to mind what I value and what I think is so important about what I do for a living. And getting young people to, in a world that's becoming increasingly more about what's in it for me, I think overall, if you are being a good person, that coincides a lot of time with being a good teammate. And if you're being a good teammate, a lot of the time, my goals and your goals will be more likely to succeed and be met. I think it's one of those things where too many people are so focused on themselves and their goal that they don't see the bigger picture of, well, how about I just go about every situation being the best person I can be? Generally speaking, if you come to work each day and you give it your all with a positive attitude, I think that's going to lead to good things. Yes. And I think sometimes we get so bogged down by the grass is greener on the other side. I think we get so bogged down about my immediate goals or my impatience. These things aren't happening for me right away. So-and-so is doing this. Cindy is doing great. How come I can't reach that pinnacle of excellence? And instead, just go about your day-to-day, be extremely patient, be extremely generous and kind, be extremely hardworking, and generally those things that you're trying to accomplish will work out just due to the way that you're operating in life, And so I felt that a majority of us that were brought together for that TEDx had that commonality and that understanding of, it's the greater whole first. Yeah. And I'm a cog, but I need to play my role within that collective in order for this to succeed. And I thought we all did that. And that's what's fun about it, right? When you pull your own weight, it allows for trust from your peers. It allows for trust from yourself when you overcome something like that. And I say overcome, I mean, we were just public speaking, which can be really scary. It takes a lot of preparation. But I think when you do something like that, it gives you inherent and greater trust that you can accomplish something just as stressful, something that takes just as much preparation as a TEDx talk, and be able to go out and accomplish those things.
Right.
I think immediately afterwards, Cindy, I don't know how you felt, but I felt as if I don't want to do that again. And now that it's been a while, I've had some time to digest it. I've had some time to reflect on it. And I think to myself, you know what, I could do that. And I think I could even do this part a little bit better. And so it's one of those things where within your work ethic creates a greater amount of trust inherently within and from without, from the outside. And I think it allows us to accomplish greater things, but you have to knock down that first barrier.
Right. Yeah. I thought it was interesting what you just said, because for me, it was a little bit different. I wanted to do it. I was very excited. I was like, I could do this again.
Okay, well, that's awesome.
And the thing is that I think for me, I went through a season in my life of deep soul searching. And I think that's been my whole life experience. But these last couple of years were a little bit more so because I don't know if I mentioned this to you last time, but my mother died during the pandemic. So she was one of the people who got COVID in 2020 before there were medical measures, vaccine, etc., to help the people who got COVID.
I don't recall us talking about, because it wouldn't be the specific conversation. It'd be the way. It'd be like what you remember is like the way you feel when somebody brings something like that up.
Not always the details.
Right. And so I don't believe we had that discussion.
We did.
Just because I feel like I would have remembered that.
And I didn't remember, because I'm pretty open. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because my mother was my best friend. She really was. And it completely threw my life upside down, because for me, her passing was very unnatural. Usually when people transition, they're at a certain age. My mother was still young. She was healthy. You're surrounded by your family, your friends, oftentimes, not always, but often it's in hospice care. It was none of that. It was behind the veil of a glass window where you couldn't really be with your loved one or interact. And so what ended up happening is I was one of the people who were part of the Great Resignation, who resigned from their job at that time. I said to myself, I have a great job. Nothing wrong with my job, but it's more important for me to be closer to family. My family is from Southern California, and I was living in the Central Valley of California at the time.
Yeah.
And so I created an exit plan with my dean. I gave a 6 months notice, which is a really long time when you think about it. But I was in a position of certain complex duties that I couldn't just leave in 2 weeks. It would have been disastrous, and I wouldn't have felt right ethically, because in my old post, I gave the best of me in the manner that I best could. And so there were a lot of projects, there were overlapping grants. So I wanted to exit in a way that did not harm the organization, but also allowed me to transition back home. And when I did that, I finally had time to grieve, because there wasn't even a traditional grieving process where you have a service. None of the things that are normally afforded to a person were afforded to my mother. So there was a lot of things to come to terms with. So when I relocated back home, I said, okay, I'm not in a hurry to go back to work. And that was a privilege that I had. And I said, what's next for me? What is next for Cindy? So there was a lot of a soul searching. And at that time I wrote and published a book called Life Beyond the Disease, which is about being as healthy as you can and having a strong mental, emotional, and physical mindset in spite of having some kind of life challenge or disease. I've been quite open that I have type 1 diabetes. I have to work extra hard at being healthy, but I also tell people it's probably why I am healthier than most, because I'm very thoughtful and mindful of my health. So I published the book, and I decided to start this podcast. And then I woke up one day and said, I want to give a TEDx talk. Just out of the blue. It had never been within my field of probabilities. It was not on the radar. I woke up one day and said, how do I do this? I didn't realize how complicated it could be, and what a gift it is to actually be able to give one and put out your message, because it's quite competitive and difficult to be selected as a speaker in most cases. So I was actually quite excited, and I wanted to put forth my message of the framework that I created called the Triad of Recognition. I was actually quite excited to do it. And afterwards, I felt equally as excited walking off the stage saying, oh yeah, this is fine. You know, we did it. And I probably don't did as many fears, only because I've taught a lot, and I've taught really large groups. I've given lectures to groups of over 1,000, but that does not mean I was not nervous. It does not mean I doubted myself. And it does not mean I had to prepare just as hard as anybody else. And it does not mean it wasn't a journey. I just left energized, and I was like, okay, what's next? I'm ready for more. So my experience was slightly different, and I thought it was a beautiful gift. Shout out again to Prince and Amanda who organized this and selected the speakers. So it was a beautiful gift to have received. And I'm really excited to see what unfolds as a result of it. But I want to circle back to a couple of things you said before we talked about what it felt like afterwards. You were talking really in essence about bringing yourself to the team, having an attitude that is about helping people, a mindset. And what you were really, in my opinion, referencing were human skills, were emotional intelligence, relatability. And that's, I think, what created the bond, and also the special event, was this sense of who I am as a person, in my humanity and my skills, and how we use them together. And you also mentioned that we live in a time where there's a lot of me mentality.
Yeah,
But
I think I think it's just one of those things, someone that is willing to put themselves out there like that when giving a big public forum. I think we all have a commonality just in part of the ideology behind that. I want to push myself. I'm exposing myself to success or failure here up on stage. I've taken time and I've sacrificed to put out something that I could be proud of and that is meaningful, right? Nick Saban, the old Alabama football head coach, talks about how people like that attract other people like that. He talks about great wanting to be around great and not being afraid of great. Because if we're both kind of pushing that same mindset and ideology, then we have nothing to fear. There should be no mistrust or there should be no issue. But it's mediocrity a lot of the time, someone that's not willing to put themselves out there, someone that's, fearful of failure to an extent to where they act too cool, or maybe they try and cover those things with a false arrogance.
Yes.
It's generally those people that also get along, and they wouldn't get along with somebody that's trying to reach other heights, whether professionally or socially or spiritually, right?
Yes.
I think a lot of the time, and it goes back to what I was talking about with that inherent trust. If you have the belief in yourself, a lot of the time it's due to the time and effort and preparation you've put in, which allows others to believe in you as well. And, I think it's not confidence that necessarily allows you to be a good leader. I think it's the work that's led you to become confident that then allows you to be a good leader. And so within that space, you had a lot of people that were really pushing themselves daily, and trying to really evolve to be the upper echelon of their field, whatever that might be. We had so many different people coming from different backgrounds. I just felt that is what connected us, just being in that setting. You realized everyone there, from Noah, who was very much more like wilderness and outdoors and, a leader in the sense of his adventurousness, all the way to Victoria, who was more so talking about sports psychology and how sports psychology can allow or disallow an extreme amount of belief within yourself. And so you see leaders on both different sides just being passionate about what it is that they do and what it is that they've worked really hard towards. And I can get along with anybody that puts forth that amount of effort and that amount of care towards what it is that they do. And that's something that we stress to our athletes all the time, is this needs to mean something to you. If you are intrinsically motivated, you will be fine, and you will get along with coaches who are pushing you hard, and you will get along with people that are getting you up early, and you will get along with people that maybe are keeping you longer. You will take coaching better. It is those who are extrinsically motivated by maybe wins and losses, or how much money they're receiving on scholarship, or just the different facets that go into being a collegiate athlete. If you are extrinsically motivated, that is not a very strong source of motivation. And a lot of the time that leads you to not be as good as one would hope you could be, or as maybe as good as you even hoped yourself could be. And so those who are putting in the time and effort are going to be attracted to those who are also putting in the time and effort, even if the time and effort that you're putting in is not leading to the results that you're hoping they will. Right.
Yes. And let me interject a bit. Because you said something earlier, and I wanted to expand on that, is this idea of failure. We all fail. We all fail. We all get knocked down by life. I can give you a long list of all the times that I have failed. I've been knocked down. I've made poor judgment calls, but it's not about the failure. It's what you learned from the failure and how you get up and how you move forward. Because whether you're an athlete or academic or business leader, what pushes us sometimes, what propels us, is what we learned from the failures. Now, I don't wish failure on anybody, but it goes down to mindset. What happens when you fail?
Right.
Do you drown in self-pity? And guess what? I've done that just like everybody else.
Yeah. Yep.
Or do you say, okay, what's next? And that's what I tend to do. I'll have my 2 minutes of pour me in and I'm like, okay, I'm over it. What's next? Because if not, we're going to be very unhappy in our life. And it takes away from that joy that you were referencing in earlier, because sometimes there's joy even in remembering our failures, because we're like, oh, that failure was a catalyst for whatever situation that came later. So I did want to mention that, how failure is not the end of the world, but what matters when we have those setbacks is mindset. And the other thing I do want to fess up, if you will, is we were talking about preparing for the talk and being nervous. I was not nervous about the talk, but I'll tell you what I was nervous about. You probably are not gonna see this one coming. Are you ready for it?
Okay, I'm ready.
I was intimidated by the fact that the majority of the speakers were athletes. Let me explain why.
Okay.
First of all, I exercise. I do my best to care for myself, but I'm not a collegiate coach. I didn't lead, the top tier basketball women's team of the nation. I didn't do this. There was this intimidation from the physical factor, but also because one of the things that I've noticed, when we are physically strong, it does affect our mental, our emotional, and our spiritual, wellness, our strength, our resilience, because when you feel good physically, you feel good about other aspects of our life. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, there's going to be all these really strong people exuding all this strength out to the audience. And then there's me. And I said, oh no, but wait a minute, Cindy, you're you. So yes, you are not the coach, the athlete, the person with the most muscles, but you have a different muscle, a different strength. And you still care for your body for health reasons. So it's going to be okay. But I had that moment where I told David, my other half, you know what? I have to really make sure I stay fit leading up to the TEDx talk. I don't want to look unfit next to the others. So that's my little confession, if you will. So we all have different things that we navigate. So I wasn't necessarily nervous about talking, although I wasn't necessarily nervous about the talk in the traditional sense of being on stage. I was nervous about making sure that I felt that I wanted my energy, my physical strength to match everybody else. And not from a competitive place, but just from a place of, we all holding a similar space. So there you go.
Wasn't that within your 40 days of empowerment and leadership?
Yes. I did a short on that. Yes.
Exercise empowers, I think, is what the title was. Yeah. That might have been your most recent post. Right?
Yes. I posted that yesterday.
Yeah. No, I've been seeing those. I've really enjoyed a lot of them. Victoria really enjoyed. There was one about breathing and kind of calming breaths, somewhere in the high teens. And there was also one maybe in the low 20s that just discussed your outlook and positivity in the kind of more you feed that side of you, the more easy it is to stay kind of in that positive mindset. Whereas, we talked earlier about there is some of those times where you have, whether it's self-loathing or whether it's just not happy with the situation you're in life. You tend to cling on to those things because you're dwelling on those things. The negative begets negative and the positive begets positive.
The energies expand, whatever you focus on. There's an interesting book I read, somewhere between 10 to 12 years ago called E equals MC squared. It was this idea of understanding energy and the mind and what you focus on. So the book gave you a series of exercises of something you had to focus on so that you could understand how your energy really directs your thoughts. So there was one exercise where you had to look for a gold beige car and count how many you found in a 24-hour period. And you don't see very many gold beige cars out there. The moment my 24 hours started, I was constantly looking for that car. I counted about 30 by the end of the 24 hours.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. There was another one where it asked you to count how many butterflies you saw in a 24-hour period.
Mm-hmm.
And you had to choose between, I think, I don't know if I have this right because I read the book so long ago, but it was something about either a white or yellow butterfly versus a purple butterfly. I was reading the book around springtime and I'm like, well, it's butterfly season. So there's going to be a lot of monarchs out there or white butterflies. So let's see if I could find purple butterflies. I thought that was going to be a bit of a harder challenge because I really wanted to see how far this idea of what you focus on expands.
Right.
So, the 24-hour period is happening and I'm not finding very many purple butterflies. So I'm like, well, maybe this is an exception to the rule because I've been looking for them. Maybe not as hard as the beige car because purple butterflies are harder to come by, but I've been looking. As I'm starting to have some doubts, I arrive at some friend's home. I used to go there every Sunday afternoon as part of a meditation meetup group. I kid you not, the moment I walked into their home for the first time ever, and I had been in their home many times, I noticed all of their cushions had purple butterfly. And I had never noticed that before.
So funny.
So what you focus on, what you give energy to does become a part of your reality because what's happening is that is your focus. That is no different than you focusing on, let's say, bodybuilding. I'm going to focus on going to the gym and building muscle. If that is your focus, you will build the muscle. Likewise, if your focus is negativity, that is what you're building. And if your focus is positivity, that is what you're building. That was a fun, interesting book from a couple of years ago, but it did really hone in the idea of what you focus on really becomes a big part of your life that expands. And you see it in different ways.
And that's something that, needs to be continually advocated and taught to our younger generations, I think. I think so many of us are looking to the right, looking to the left, seeing what everyone else is doing, comparing, and you are focused on the externals outside of you. And so you do tend to kind of feed off of either their positives or their negatives. But instead, like you're talking about through meditation or just general soul searching, there is something to be said about having a strong internal dialogue. And I think going back to exercise empowerment, that's one of my favorite things about exercise is the internal dialogue that you do have when you're struggling through the bouts of exercise that you're performing, right?
And you learn to listen to your body.
Yeah.
To exactly the intelligence of your body. And remember what Bruce Lee said. Bruce Lee said his best meditations were when he was running.
I could believe it.
Not necessarily when he was sitting down, with his eyes closed, because meditation isn't about, it's not that. It can be, but it's many things and you can approach it differently. As an example, if you're walking and you let your vision drop a little bit and focus your vision on the forefront versus what's immediately in front of you, it puts you in a more meditative place. Or, for example, have you ever on a weekend accidentally driven to work?
Yes, that's so weird.
You know why? Funny. Because you are in a state, you go into these alpha and theta states of repetitive motion, of focus, that things around you don't come to the forefront, but it's also something that you get used to doing. And some of your best ideas, some of the biggest insights happen when you're driving.
That's so interesting because I've definitely been going somewhere and then not really think maybe where you're going so well that you don't think about it. And then you end up turning like as if you're going to work. And then you kind of snap out of it and go, wait, that was the wrong turn. Like, what am I doing right now? I think that is super interesting. I've never really spoken that out loud before that I've made an error like that. And so it's just interesting that, I'm not the only one.
Henry, I promise you are not the only one. I remember the first time it happened to me, I was horrified. So I started to ask family and friends, has that ever happened to you? And 9 out of 10 times, people told me yes, right? So the mind is a very, very, very powerful thing, and you can direct it in so many ways. But I think one of the most powerful directions you can have it go towards is within, and cut out the external noise of it, of the need for external validations, which is, I think it's something that you've talked about during our time together, but maybe
Definitely.
use different words. So, you've talked about how people focus on what's on the outside, you focus on this. You've talked about how with the younger generation, you want to help them move forward. And a good way to move forward is self-awareness. And that self-awareness comes from going within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just a big proponent of that self-talk. I think, I don't know, I'm aging myself a little bit here. I'm not that old.
I promise you, I'm older than you, Henry.
I guess it's because I deal with a lot of younger people. And, I just feel like there's so many things that you can distract yourself with that it's hard to be honest with how you're actually feeling. I think if you're nervous, you go to your phone and you go on whatever. I think if you're happy, you might go on your phone and share those things. I think if you're sad, you might go on your phone and try and find a distraction. If there's a negative, generally you can go on your device and just kind of zone out and go into a different distracting place. If it's positive, then maybe you can even build upon that positive. But I think there's a lot to be said, like when you mentioned meditation or running or just general exercise or anything that someone does look deeper within themselves and kind of find their truths, so to speak. I think that's something that is a lost art in a lot of ways. And I think there needs to be a little bit more of that. And I think self-awareness is necessary for the awareness of others' emotions, and being empathetic also means that you're kind of aware of and forgiving yourself for your mistakes. We talked about failures earlier. I think there needs to be a greater amount of forgiveness for yourself in order to be able to then forgive others. And I think it goes back to the old adage that you can't love someone deeply unless you are confident and love yourself deeply.
Absolutely.
And I don't think those things happen if you're not really looking within, talking to yourself within, and having meaningful, truthful dialogue. And a lot of the time that might be generated from an instructor, a professor, a teacher, a coach. I don't think we are the guides in order for those things to happen. But a lot of the time, the most difficult part of working with others, whether it's your age, older, younger, is that you need to kind of tell them those truths, but then they're not going to discover those things unless they really sit down and own that themselves.
I like that. I like that, because that's part of having personal agency and self-discovery.
Yes.
Let me ask you something. How do you keep yourself centered and grounded so that you don't go into that outside chatter?
Yeah. So I have two people in my life that have always been extremely honest with me, almost to the point to where it can get bothersome. I think some people, when they tell you the truth, you don't always want to hear it, right? And so my identical twin brother was that person for most of my life. And there's a strong amount of competitiveness, accountability, friendship that occurs with having an identical twin. And, I think that was someone that was by my side and able to maybe give me the reality of a certain situation when I was in it and I wanted to maybe see it a different way. Or I was trying to convince myself that it was the right thing when it wasn't, or maybe I was convincing myself that it was the wrong thing when in actuality it was totally fine. And now that person is my wife. I think it's the people that you surround yourself with, that you trust very closely. But then, like I said, there's not going to be any change elicited from those things. Those people might bring the topic up, but then you need to sit there with yourself. And so I think a lot of the times when I'm coming to a crossroad of something that I need to deeply focus on or change, it happens in a setting that I maybe feel the most privacy. So like in the shower, the car earlier, in bed, like maybe as you're just going to sleep that night. And I think that's a tough thing that I deal with personally. You know, it's not that I have an issue sleeping, but if I don't have someone next to me or something on, and I know you're not supposed to have screens on, but I will just, my brain will not stop. And sometimes I need that distraction for my brain to not replay the entire day's events or the entire next day's potential events. It's just one of those things. As I'm going to bed, as I'm waking up early, when I have those even just 5 minutes to myself, that's when I kind of do my best inward discussion and thinking. But I think the biggest one, like you mentioned, and I think this specific scenario happens every day. I don't really play music in the mornings. When I go to work, it's very early and there's no one out there. Generally, it's dark and it's early. And so I think sometimes my best thinking happens on those car rides to work when it is early. And I think my most self-dialogue happens in those instances too. But I think also when things occur, because I'm a little more aware of these processes and I'm a little more educated on these types of self-care and self-dialogue benefit, you get better and you can almost pull out that inner part of yourself quicker. And so almost within the situation now, I've been able to kind of think and talk to myself like, okay, what is the correct action here as far as, you know, talking this person down, talking this person, you know, making sure that I'm doing the best by this athlete or coworker or friend or partner or whatever it is.
Absolutely. We all go through that. And that's part of how we evolve, how we grow in emotional intelligence and wisdom, in maturity. I mean, oh gosh, when I was younger, my mind was a chatterbox. It would not stop. It just wouldn't.
Right.
So I did not sleep. I don't think I began to sleep probably until my 30s. Now I'm starting to really give away my age. I want to say my teenage years and my 20s, I rarely slept because my mind was always on chatter.
Man.
Yeah. And it took me a long time to quiet it down. But I will say something that really helped me, even though I did have that chattery mind, was actually I danced into my early 30s. I'm not saying I was the best dancer. Let's be clear. I did have a practice and did have a discipline, ballet, and I had the old school type of ballet teachers having a discipline, some type of discipline.
Yes.
And learning to discipline your mind, your body, your emotions, it is a skill. Some people are more attuned to it, are more naturally able to do it. Some people, like me, had to work at it. So coming to this place of where you see me now, where I can be very zen. I'm a very calm and collected person. There could be chaos around me and everything's good. We're good. Because you know that whatever's happening, Cindy's going to handle it. And probably in a balanced way. But it did not come naturally, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Because of that chatterbox. But the discipline of dance and just really, remember we talked about earlier about focusing on one thing. So if you're focusing, you know, on going through, you know, the conditioning, the training, it makes your mind think about something else. Right. And it helps you get in touch with your body and understand space around you, right? You have to have a sense of space, which I'm not, you know, a football player or a basketball player, but I would imagine it's quite similar. You have to understand the space around you where your teammates are at, have a sense of spatial awareness. I also did ballroom dance, and that requires a lot of training. And I trained, like when I'm telling you I trained multiple days a week, and I wasn't a professional. I did it because It brought me joy. It filled my spirit with joy. We talked about joy earlier, made me feel good, and it was fun. When I was deep in my doctoral program, I wasn't able to dance as much because I actually completed my PhD a little bit later in my 30s, not in my late 20s, just because I took some time off in between. So I couldn't spend that much time doing physical activities. I still did it, but not to the extent that I did before. And
Yeah.
that's when I turned to meditation. And even then, early on, it took me a minute because the mind, I was thinking about the paper I had to write, the books I had to read, the classes I had to teach, right? There's always so much, but it just became a discipline. And like everything, whether it's confidence, which you mentioned earlier, or a skill, repetitive actions
Yes.
makes you better. So the more
Yes.
you practice calming down your mind, being thoughtful, being mindful, thinking about not just ourselves, but the greater good, it becomes a habit and it makes a difference,
Well,
especially for those of us with busy minds.
and you mentioned earlier failure, right? And how your failures then through careful thought and deliberation lead to success later down the line. It's just like any of these other adversities, small or big, that we experience on the day to day. Having trouble sleeping, you learn to cope with that, but you have to really deal with it truthfully in order for it then to become something that you do overcome.
Exactly.
I think that is something that does go hand in hand. It's almost like those small daily things that we have issues with, those small little failures, just for lack of a better term, lead us to then be overall better. Right.
Exactly.
And
And that's life, right? This process of growth, of
yes.
evolution,
Yeah.
of becoming, of shedding skin and becoming, you know, hopefully a better version of whoever we were yesterday.
Being around athletics and sports, that is so ingrained, and I don't love the adage of be 1% better every day, because it's not linear. That progress doesn't just
No.
happen. It's very up and down and undulating. But I think the important thing is going back to who we are attracted to as human beings. If you know the person is at least putting in the time and effort to do so, to become a better version of themselves than they were the day before, and that's happening habitually, consistently, they have the discipline, like you mentioned, to be able to push themselves to be better each and every time. All those things need to happen in order to form trust and, like you mentioned, discipline. And if you have greater discipline, then the other hard things around you just don't seem as difficult. I think more people need to be unafraid to fail,
Because we're all going to fail.
You're all going to fail. And
we're all going to fail.
if you specifically expose yourself to a situation of high likelihood to fail, then you're only going to come out on the other side of that situation. It's just difficult for me when somebody hides or shies away from those things. Expose yourself to it, because even if you're hiding or shying away from it, it's going to happen naturally, organically, inherently. Those things are going to happen, and then it's that much harder to deal with if you're not putting yourself in those situations more often.
Absolutely. And something that really helps is, one, we've talked about having that inner dialogue, but two, we also touched upon it, is the relationships, the people who you surround yourself with. Like you said, you have two people who are important catalysts for you for that self-reflection, right? Your twin and your wife, Victoria. Those relationships help. You have Victoria, you have your twin, and I'm very fortunate. I have David. You've met David. I have my brother. My brother and I are completely polar opposites. And yet there is this honesty, sometimes a bit raw, between us, but that's what we need, because I used to be very sensitive and he's helped me be less sensitive, has that big personality and does not hold back. And then I come along and I'm like, okay, but you need to see this point of view. So there's this push and pull, and I'm grateful for that. because that relationship keeps me honest.
And I think that is, at its essence, what we need to do a better job of as a culture, as a society, is seeing the other side of things. You mentioned you and your brother being stark differences to one another and maybe not even having the same beliefs in a lot of ways. But if we can be open-minded, take a step back, understand where they're coming from, have them hopefully understand where you're coming from, there's a lot of things that we can push towards and accomplish. But because people are so set in their ways and they refuse to kind of see the other side, or maybe it's due to lack of experience, like life experience, that they can't really understand what the other person is meaning or saying, or right, wrong, or indifferent. I just think there needs to be, like you mentioned, more people of different backgrounds and opposing backgrounds a lot of the time, just sitting down and coming to a commonality and an understanding, because there are so many more of things that we have in common with one another as opposed to things that that are way different. And
I like that. Absolutely. We have more in common than we have differences. We have to be willing to meet each other there and just say, look, we can agree, we can get along, we can move forward. This has been so much fun. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience before we begin to wrap it up?
No, not necessarily. I don't have any big life events coming up or anything. I just think that the only thing that I would want to say is, this is something I do think about a lot, are the things that we've talked about today. And I mentioned it earlier, but for any of those of you that are listening, I just hope that you take this away. I'm a firm believer that if you work hard with a positive attitude, whatever it is you're setting out to accomplish will happen one way or another.
Wise words.
I think that is something that has led me to the place that I'm at currently. I think most people, if they looked back on the journey to wherever they are currently, whether they like it or dislike it, they could see if they're at somewhere currently they don't like as much, maybe they haven't been as impactful with their work ethic, or maybe they haven't been as positive with the way that they operate daily and the way that they feed their positivity throughout their daily habits. I am just trying to do that myself, and it's difficult, but it's something that I need to continue to remind myself, and I want to remind others that your goals are tangible. It's just about your daily attitude. And it's really about taking those little daily steps to increase, like we spoke earlier about, work ethic / discipline.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And I'm going to add something else.
Please.
Which is actually going to piggyback off of something you opened with. Joy, the joy in life. Do things that bring you joy, because we will all face challenges. We will all have our ups and downs, and sometimes we're wondering when it's going to finally happen, that thing that we're striving for, working towards. If we don't focus on the joy, it's a pretty sad path. It becomes all about work, and it doesn't feel as fulfilling.
Right.
You don't have an opportunity to recharge, regenerate.
Right.
So work hard, but also make time for joy. Find joy, laugh, smile, because that recharges you.
Yeah.
Keep on grinding, keep on working, and remember, find joy, embrace the joy, be the joy.
I love that.
Henry, it was fun having you. Thank you so much. We're going to have to do it a third time in a couple of months or so.
I would love to, Cindy. I always enjoy getting a chance to talk to you, and, whether it's recorded or just our own personal conversations, I respect and appreciate the amount of thoughtfulness that you bring to the table, and I'm always going to talk to somebody that is that intentional and open-minded.
Likewise, please remember to subscribe to the channel. We have a lot of wonderful content, and it supports the effort put into this love endeavor called PreZenze that not just about me, but also about you, our community, and how we share our knowledge and our experience to create a better world with these conversations.
Thank you for joining us on PreZenze. For more information on how you can create greater levels of impactful presence in your professional and personal life, visit www.cindyurrutia.com and follow me on social media. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Feel free to post a comment and we'll read it on the show.